you ever had a sudden spark of creativity? Maybe you were walking down the street and a line of poetry came to you, or you were in the shower and a melody just appeared in your head. We often call this inspiration, but where does it really come from? Is it a gift from the gods, as the ancients believed, or is it something we can understand, even train ourselves to access? Today, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating questions in creativity. Where does inspiration come from? We'll dive into psychology, philosophy, neuroscience, and history. We'll look at artists like Beethoven, Michelangelo, and Virginia Woolf, and what their work reveals about inspiration. And we'll discover whether inspiration is a mysterious lightning strike or something you can invite into your life. The word inspiration itself comes from the Latin inspirare, meaning to breathe into. Ancient cultures saw inspiration as something divine, something that came from outside the human mind. The Greeks believed in the Muses, 9 goddesses of the arts. Poets like Homer would begin their epics with a prayer. Sing in me, O Muse. They weren't claiming ownership of their creativity. They were vessels. Inspiration was given, not made. In Rome, Cicero described poets as being filled with a kind of divine madness. Later, Renaissance thinkers like Marsilio Ficino would revive this idea, creativity as spiritual possession. This view lasted for centuries. Plato even argued that inspiration couldn't be rational. In his dialogue Ion, he says poets don't create by skill, but because they were inspired by their gods. So for the ancients, inspiration wasn't something you worked for, and it happened to you, but as we'll see, this idea shifted dramatically with time. By the Enlightenment, thinkers started moving away from the divine. Inspiration was no longer seen as a supernatural force, but as something rooted in human ability. The word genius itself changed meaning. Originally, a genius was a kind of guiding spirit, but during the 18th century, it came to mean an extraordinary individual, someone with rare natural talent. Take Beethoven, for example. He often spoke of his music coming from a higher place, yet he also worked tirelessly, sketching, rewriting, obsessively refining. Scholars like Maynard Solomon, in his biography of Beethoven, show how inspiration for him wasn't separate from discipline, it was fused with it. This is a crucial turning point. Inspiration was no longer purely mystical. It was something connected to psychology, effort, and the human mind. Fast forward to modern research. Psychologists have actually studied inspiration as a measurable phenomenon. One of the leading figures is Todd M. Thrash, who, along with Andrew Elliott, developed something called the inspiration scale. In their 2003 paper, Inspiration as a Psychological Construct, they defined inspiration as having 3 main qualities. Evocation. It comes to you spontaneously, not forced. Transcendence. It helps you see beyond your ordinary limitations. Approach motivation. It pushes you to act, to create something. Interestingly, Thrash and Elliott found that people who experience inspiration more often tend to have higher levels of openness to experience, a personality trait linked with creativity. So inspiration isn't random, it has psychological patterns. Let's talk about the neuroscience of inspiration. What's happening in the brain when we feel inspired? Neuroscience gives us some clues, and studies of creativity often point to something called the default mode network, DMN, a set of brain regions active when the mind is wandering or daydreaming. This is when we make surprising connections. For example, a 2015 study in NeuroImage showed that during moments of insight, the brain exhibits a burst of activity in the right anterior superior temporal gyrus. This region helps link distant ideas together. That's why so many people report aha moments when they're not actively working, like Archimedes shouting Eureka in the bath. The brain connects dots when it's relaxed. This explains why inspiration often feels like it comes out of nowhere. In reality, it's your unconscious mind weaving together patterns until something clicks. But let's pause, because there's a dangerous myth about inspiration, that it only arrives in sudden flashes. Yes, those flashes happen. But history shows that inspiration often comes after long, painstaking effort. Consider Michelangelo. He's often depicted as a genius who simply saw the statue into marble. But his notebooks reveal endless studies, sketches, and revisions. The Sistine Chapel ceiling took him 4 years of backbreaking labor. Inspiration guided him, but discipline carried him through. Or take Virginia Woolf. In her diary, she wrote of struggling for weeks with a single passage. Inspiration for her was not a sudden gift. It was the result of immersion, persistence, and returning to the page again and again. So maybe the truth is this: inspiration doesn't replace hard work. It emerges through it. Music gives us some of the clearest windows into inspiration. Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony was inspired by long walks in nature. He once said, "No one can love the country as much as I do. I cannot live without it." For him, inspiration came from deep observation of the natural world. Mozart, on the other hand, described inspiration as something sudden. When I am, as it were, completely myself, entirely alone, my ideas flow best and most abundantly. But modern scholars remind us that Mozart also revised and reworked heavily. Stravinsky famously rejected the idea of divine inspiration. He said, "Just as appetite comes by eating, so work brings inspiration." In other words, sit down and start. The inspiration will follow. So even among the greats, inspiration had many faces: nature, solitude, discipline, or pure habit. Visual art also shows us how inspiration works. Leonardo da Vinci was endlessly curious. He studied anatomy, engineering, botany. His inspiration didn't come from one source, but from the web of knowledge he pursued. That's why his notebooks contain everything from flying machines to sketches of mussels. Vincent van Gogh found inspiration in emotion and landscape. Letters to his brother Theo reveal how colors and light in the French countryside stirred him to paint. His art wasn't just visual, it was emotional translation. Claude Monet created his Water Lilies series by painting the same pond in different lights over and over. His inspiration wasn't a one-time spark, but a deep dialogue with one subject across years. So again, inspiration isn't only about moments of magic, it's about attention, persistence, and relationship with the world. Interestingly, many artists found inspiration in struggle. Dostoevsky wrote masterpieces like The Brothers Karamazov after surviving prison and exile. Frida Kahlo transformed lifelong physical pain into surreal, haunting self-portraits. Beethoven, after losing his hearing, composed his Ninth Symphony, one of the most inspired works in history. Research backs this up. A 2014 study in Frontiers in Psychology found that negative emotions can sometimes enhance creativity by deepening self-reflection. So while we don't need suffering to be creative, hardship often reshapes perspective, fueling inspiration. This brings us to the practical questions. Can you invite inspiration into your life? Psychologists suggest yes. A few strategies. Exposure to new experiences. Research by Scott Barry Kaufman shows that openness to novelty sparks inspiration. Travel, reading widely, or meeting new people can feed the creative mind. Mind-wandering salary. Allowing yourself downtime, walks, or even boredom helps the default mode network do its work. Journaling. Many artists, from Leonardo to Woolf, used diaries to capture fleeting thoughts that later grew into major works, Routine and Discipline. As Stravinsky noted, inspiration often follows effort. Establishing habits gives inspiration a structure to flow into. Mindfulness and presence. Studies show meditation increases divergent thinking, a key element of creativity. Simply paying close attention can awaken inspiration. So while you can't force inspiration, you can create conditions that make it more likely to appear. And yet, after all the research, all the psychology, all the history, there's still something mysterious about inspiration. Why did Beethoven, deaf and despairing, suddenly hear a chorus singing Ode to Joy in his imagination? Why did Van Gogh see swirling stars where others saw a quiet night sky? Science explains part of it. Psychology explains another part. But maybe there's always a remainder, something we can't fully capture. As poet Elizabeth Gilbert said in her TED Talk, Your Elusive Creative Genius, maybe inspiration really is like a muse, a force outside us, or maybe it's simply the most human of all experiences, the moment when imagination and effort meet and something new comes into being. So, where does inspiration come from? From the ancients, we learned it was divine. From Enlightenment thinkers, we learned it was human genius. From psychology and neuroscience, we learned it comes from patterns in the brain, openness, and even daydreaming. From artists, we learned it comes from discipline, struggle, nature, and emotion. Perhaps the real answer is inspiration comes from everywhere and nowhere. It's part gift, part effort. It's both ordinary and miraculous. The great composer Johannes Brahms once said, "Without craftsmanship, inspiration is a mere reed shaken in the wind." Maybe the truth is this: inspiration visits everyone, but it's up to us to be ready when it comes. So next time you're searching for inspiration, remember, it's not just waiting for you out there. It's already inside you, waiting for the right moment to rise. Thank you.